From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Words to live by.
I prefer working to just doing nothing, watching TV, or reading books.
One cattle rancher celebrates a century at the sale barn. Millions of dollars in debt and unable to pay farmers.
We are in the process of filing our claim.
How one grain facility's financial problems may be part of a larger picture. And it's almost time to plant winter wheat in the plains.
I'm a little bit pessimistic about what our chances are going forward into our wheat crop.
The problems plaguing the crop even before seed goes in the ground. Right now on AgDay. Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. We've turned the calendar to September, and while some farmers are just starting to think about bringing in the summer harvest, others are getting ready for another round of planting. Now, over the next couple of weeks, growers will be looking to plant the winter wheat crop, but putting seeds into the dry soil may prove challenging. Take, for example, Oklahoma, where a vast majority of the state is in some sort of drought, with 48% of the state in extreme drought conditions. And while there may be some improvement that show up in the new drought monitor map when it's released later today, the rains have been small and not much change is expected. Now, officials say soil moisture levels are also pretty depleted, as you can see in this map showing the one-day average for moisture in the top 4 inches of soil. Most places with less than 1 inch of water available. Not good news as we head into another winter where some forecasters are predicting dry conditions to continue.
And as you look down into those soil profiles, we have sensors at 2, 4, 10, and 24 inches. Unfortunately, they get drier as we go deeper into the soil. So until we get some heavier rains that will replenish those soil moisture levels, I'm a little bit pessimistic about what our chances are going forward into our wheat crop.
Now, Lee says current crop production in the state is down because crops have used up the water in the soil, but he has a little more hope for the soybean crop. He says even irrigated crops are struggling due to high heat conditions, which impacted pollination. Now, the South has battled drought conditions all season long, but several areas have been getting hit with rainfall for days now, and even more is on the way. Meteorologist Mahir Savik joins us with a wider view of the root zone moisture map.
That's right, Clinton. We've had more rain across parts of the Deep South and across the Gulf Coast. It's really factored into a lot of very wet conditions, even flooding across parts of Texas and the Deep South. Still very dry, though, across the middle part of the country, including parts of the Corn Belt, back into places like Kansas and Nebraska, and into parts of the north central part of the country, including Montana and the Dakotas, and still extremely dry in the Southwest. But here's a look at that unsettled pattern as we kind of zoom in there on the Gulf Coast and parts of Texas. A couple of fronts stalling out. That's going to keep things very unsettled all the way through this Labor Day weekend. So any outdoor plans down there, you may have to watch for some of those heavier downpours. And here's a look at some of that precipitation over the next couple of days, all the way through Saturday. Not much is going on except for right along the coast and in parts of Texas. But watch as we head through next week. When we put this in motion, you'll see a lot more precipitation there. And very tropical, heavy rains moving in with those stalled out fronts, and even some more rain for parts of the upper Midwest and across parts of the Four Corners region as well. Also up into parts of the Mid-Atlantic, see more rain heading through this week. And check out this stunning scene in central Pennsylvania. That's my home state. Ben Peckman sharing this beautiful field of sunflowers. He says this is the first time he's planted a sunflower crop here. And he also says it's hard to believe that this was a wheat field just 7 weeks ago. I'll have more on your forecast coming up.
Big news in the beef world. Walmart is investing in another beef processing facility. Drovers reporting the company will become a minority partner in the sustainable beef plant that's due to be constructed in North Platte, Nebraska. Now, it says it's part of a broader strategic partnership to source top quality Angus beef from sustainable beef. Now, 3 years ago, Walmart announced a partnership with 44 farms to provide Angus beef for about 500 stores in the Southeast. Sustainable Beef's plans are to process 400,000 head per year. That's about 1,500 a day. Groundbreaking is scheduled for later this month, with the facility opening in late 2024. A grain facility in northeast Iowa had its license revoked last week and won't be able to pay some of the farmers who sold grain there. As AgDay's Michelle Rook has found out, this isn't an isolated incident and may be pointing to a bigger problem.
B&B Farm Store in Jessup, Iowa had their grain license pulled by the state after falling $4.5 million in debt. That left some of the farmers who sold grain there filing claims with Iowa's Grain Warehouse Indemnity Fund to get compensation. But with the value of grain today, that may not be enough to make farmers whole, which is raising some red flags. B&B Farm Store defaulted on an estimated $1.3 million of grain they bought from 60 Jessup area farmers. One of those was Ben Reinshee. He sold B&B 20,000 bushels of corn this spring that he wasn't paid for and now has to rely on the Iowa Grain Warehouse Indemnity Fund for payment.
We are in the process of filing our claim. We should be paid 90% of the grain's value up to $300,000.
That should cover most of his losses, but that isn't the case in many states with bonding or indemnity funds. Even Iowa's was set up in the 1980s when grain prices were considerably lower.
These funds do run out very quickly. For example, the Iowa fund, depending on when you look at it in time, is anywhere from $3 to $8 million. Well, at $3 corn, that covers a lot more bushels than it does at $7 to $8 corn.
Probably 300,000 is a very low number to protect producer from indemnity, and that if it would be possible to maybe double that, perhaps up to $1 million even. I think that would be more in line with today's standards.
As a result, some state legislatures have revisited and modernized their grain bond or indemnity programs to better reflect the marketplace, and others may need to follow suit.
So I think there will be some debate over, do we need to increase the size of these funds? Do we need to be more proactive in looking for these problems out here?
And Hart says the Iowa Department of Ag is looking to do more audits as elevators and grain facilities have gotten larger to red flag when they're getting in trouble and prevent a failure. In the meantime, Hart says farmers need to protect themselves and remember there's counterparty risk. So he says only sell to entities you trust and don't deliver grain without setting a price or accepting payment at the time of delivery.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Now, USDA raised its forecast for ag exports and imports for this year, calling for a record for both. It increased its ag export outlook by $5 billion from May to now $196 billion. That's up more than $23 billion from last year. The ag import forecast was also raised more than $11 billion to $192 billion, leaving a trade surplus of $4 billion. Looking ahead to the next fiscal year, now it expects ag exports to decline $2.5 billion to $193.5 billion, primarily due to lower exports of cotton, beef, and sorghum, and predicts ag imports to rise another $5 billion to a record $197 billion, leaving a trade deficit of $3.5 billion, the first deficit in 2 years. Much needed grain has arrived in Africa, the Horn of Africa receiving its first grain shipments from Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion. United Nations World Food Program confirming the arrival. It took the MV Brave Commander 2 weeks to ship the 23,000 metric tons of wheat. Now, the grain will be distributed to other countries across the continent. Officials say more than 20 million Africans are facing food shortages. The WFP also saying that Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia are dealing with severe drought conditions. But that doesn't mean ag suppliers aren't still under threat in Ukraine. Reuters reports grain silos in the country's second biggest port of Mykolaiv were hit by Russian shelling. There are several major grain terminals in the city, and some have already come under attack during the Russian invasion, which Moscow calls a special military operation. Now, Ukraine is conducting a counteroffensive in the area, which has come under constant shelling in recent weeks to try to push Russian troops back toward Crimea, which Russia annexed back in 2014. Grains and livestock were both mixed on Wednesday. We'll get a midweek market update coming up next. And later, 2 people are headed for prison after defrauding cattle investors of hundreds of millions of dollars today in our Drovers Report.
AgDay is brought to you by EndZone from Farm Shop MFG, which allows you to rehydrate your soybeans from 10 to 13%. On a 20,000 bushel bin, that's an extra semi-load added to your bottom line. Order your EndZone fan now and get 13% off while supplies last.
Joining us with market analysis, Rich Nelson with Allendale. And we did see grains mixed on Wednesday, and corn and soybeans continue to be under a little pressure here, but we've had recessionary fears that have continued to kind of spill over into the commodities sector, haven't we?
That sure is right here. And leading into Friday morning's monthly employment report, where the trade expects to see about 300,000 head added to non-farm payrolls. Keep in mind, over the past 5 months, they've ranged 368 all the way up to over 500,000. So the trade is concerned. We're going to have a better than expected job number on Friday. Therefore, a strong Fed movement towards higher interest rates here next month.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of talk about that. The soybean market also seems to be trying to digest and continues to consolidate on ideas of a record crop, though.
It certainly does. And we're kind of matching this up with still questions about yields. So far, nobody has any major concern about the yield side, and that leaves us looking really at the demand issue here. We are seeing some sales last week and this week, but probably not yet enough to get people too excited here just yet.
But Rich, every time we get down to like $14 on the November contract, we do get good end user buying, so there must be value there.
I think that's certainly the very clear case. USDA's numbers back just a few weeks ago on the 12th, they would have suggested something in the pricing range around $13. And the trade certainly feels there'll be some type of cut to yields, maybe not dramatic, but it does appear that the $14 price is now a more acceptable price for the bottom end of things, at least in the very short term here.
And what about the pullback in the corn? Will we be able to go down too far with ideas of a smaller crop?
And that's a really tough question. I think all of us are arguing lower yields, no doubt about that as far as this discussion. The question is how much. But certainly from a pricing standpoint, you can make some strong arguments that we don't even need to see yields drop very much to say 630 or 640 or some defense lines in the sand, so to speak.
Let's also talk about the cattle market quick. Pullback there with lower cash kind of continuing to press that market.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we're kind of looking at. As of yesterday's trade or Tuesday's trade, we did have this market believing that perhaps cash might not be hit as much as expected back on Monday or last Friday. Okay. However, we did see some sales yesterday afternoon, 228, 229 or so, still under the previous week's 233 in those northern sales. All
right, thanks so much, Rich Nelson with Allendale, and more AgDays coming up.
To talk to Rich Nelson one-on-one, call 800-262-7538.
Meteorologist Matt Yurosavik joining us here, taking a look at last week's drought monitor. We have a new one coming out later today, and maybe see some differences, especially there in the southern plains.
Yes, southern plains, Gulf Coast going to stay extremely wet. Still dry, though, in the west. And those are all things that we're going to be watching for later this morning. But more moisture is on the way as we head through the next week. And we still have areas in parts of Texas, back in the San Joaquin Valley, and even parts of Nevada and Utah that are extremely dry. We definitely need more rain back here in the west to get rid of some of these drought conditions. But unfortunately, high pressure is going to be in place. Not going to see too much there in the west as we head through this week. But where we are going to likely see some improvements here over the next couple of hours when we get that new drought monitor is right here across Texas and across parts of the Southwest. And we're going to see likely more improvement as we head through next week with more rain likely, some of which could be on the heavier side though. And Texas already been dealing with flooding over the past week. May see a little bit more of that. But here's a look at the precipitation as we head through the next couple of days. Through Saturday, most of it going on right there across Texas, even into parts of the Mississippi Valley. And then we've got some showers and storms across Florida and Georgia. That's pretty much it. Most of the rest of the country staying dry. High pressure's in control back there in the west and across parts of the mid-Atlantic states. That keeps these fronts down to the south, which is exactly the type of pattern that we're going to be seeing next week. Most of those showers and storms are going to be staying south of Tennessee, south of Arkansas, and that's really going to pile up those rainfall totals as we head over the next 10 days or so. Just one little front coming through the upper Midwest, and that will drop those dew points again, make it more comfortable. But look at today, still hot and humid across most of the country. A little break from that humidity in parts of the east, including parts of the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley, but still pretty warm behind that front as it gets out of here. Temperatures rising into the Labor Day weekend, back into the 80s and 90s for much of the country, and still extremely hot back in the southwest with temperatures well over 100 degrees there. And yeah, it is because of this right here, that big ridge right through the west, and it's going to stick there through that Labor Day weekend and into next week, where the temperatures could go up in places like the Northern Plains and the Great Lakes as well. And we'll continue to track that right here on Ag Day. That's a look around the country. Now let's take a look at the weather where you live. Wakefield, Virginia, sunny and warm, a high near 89 degrees. Heading up to Rock Springs, Texas, scattered showers and thunderstorms, a high near 84 degrees. And Gillette, Wyoming, sunny and hot, 95 degrees, the high temperature.
Congrats, Ag Day, on 40 years. I'm proud to have worked alongside of you for, well, nearly a quarter of that. And congrats go out not just to Clinton and Michelle, but all the folks who work so hard behind the scenes. Marge and Andy, Mike, Russ, Tyne, Sam, Don, Eric, Missy, and of course, Brian. And on behalf of all of us at the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and since Clinton shows absolutely no signs of aging, we look forward to the next 40 years.
The cost of feeding a steer to finished weight is averaging about 25% higher for cattle marketed last week. And according to the Sterling Beef Profit Tracker, it is projected to be 31% higher for cattle placed on feed in the last week. Now, last week, cattle feeders saw average profits of $138 per head. That price is 15% higher than the same week a year ago. Estimated beef packer margins were $126 per head. That's down $24 from the previous week and down 89% from estimated margins a year ago. That's when they exceeded $1,100 per head. Two people could face decades in prison after being accused of defrauding investors of millions of dollars in an apparent Ponzi scheme based on cattle and marijuana. A federal grand jury found 70-year-old Reva Stacknew and Ron Thorgmartin guilty of wire fraud and money laundering. Now, government prosecutors say the couple raised some $650 million from investors that were promised 10 to 20% returns on their money in a matter of weeks. They then took money from new investors to pay off the older investors, claiming the money was backed by short-term investments in cattle. They also solicited investments for a marijuana business. Sentencing is scheduled for January 6th. They could face more than 120 years in prison. Now, there are people who spend a lifetime in the cattle business. And then there's Ethel Deal. She's celebrating her 100th birthday at the sale barn. That story next.
Ag Day, brought to you by Rumensin. Rumensin's quality, consistency, and efficiency make it the right choice for your cattle operation. Rumensin, trusted by generations.
What do you imagine yourself doing if you reach the age of 100? Well, for one woman in Kansas, there's nothing she'd rather be doing than raising and selling cattle. And as Austin Morton of AgDay affiliate KWCH reports, a sale barn decided to celebrate her hitting that century mark.
Happy birthday, dear Ethel.
I prefer working to just doing nothing, watching TV, or reading books. I'm going to do my work first, and when I might have my evenings for that.
Ethel has been around cows for most of her life, living on a dairy farm as a child and helping raise cattle ever since.
I've always done since I got married in 1944, because I had lived on a farm and married a farmer, and we always had cattle, and I still do.
She says staying active helps her manage the farm, even after the passing of her husband.
Because I worked and got in and out of four-wheel drive trucks and things like that, I had the muscular ability to continue. Never spent a day when I didn't work unless I was ill.
This working mentality is also what she believes the younger generation should adopt for a long and prosperous life.
Work. It's a great benefit. You need to be active, be a participant of what you're doing, and really, you have to enjoy it. There's all kinds of jobs, and what suits one does not suit another.
In the end, she just wants everyone to be happy.
Enjoy your life, but enjoy it in the proper way.
In Salina, Austin Morton, Eyewitness News.
Our thanks to Austin and KWCH for sharing that story. That's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day on the farm.